I try not to do too many outtakes, but can edit stuff, so don't feel too much stress. But are you ready to go?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. Welcome to Poor Decisions, a show about all things craft beverages. I'm Brian Lesperance, the host, and I am excited to be joined today by a legend in our industry. I feel like I say that a lot, but this time I really mean it. So I've got Scott Graham, the executive director of the Brewers Guild, joining us this afternoon. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. It's great to be in Fenville and enjoying the warm weather on a nice sunny day, although we're inside in air conditioning and it feels pretty good in here.
Yeah, no outdoor recording today, man. I tell you what, after a few straight days of 90-degree heat, we're not used to that by Lake Michigan. That is this it's starting to wear us down. You can tell every day everybody's getting a little more tired, but it looks like it's going to break and we're going to get into more normal, maritime climate here, hopefully. So let's just jump right in. We've got a lot to cover, I'm sure, since you've been at this for over 30 years, I think, as far as your connection to the industry. So maybe we'll just start there. Maybe walk us through your background, how you ended up where you are now.
Yeah, it kind of happened to me a little bit, and I happened to it. But as I was finishing college and not being independently wealthy, having to ponder something to do for a career, a big part of me was hoping that I could move back home to where I grew up, which was Harbor Springs, Michigan, and do something there. And I thought, well, maybe beer. This is in the late 80s, and small breweries were just starting to be a thing again. So I wound up, I homebrewed a couple of batches of beer and realized that I was going to have to learn something if I wanted to do this. So I wound up finding and attending a brewing school. At that time, the Siebel Institute in Chicago, there weren't people aspiring to be craft brewers really going there. There weren't that many people. There weren't a bunch of books that you can read. There weren't podcasts. There weren't resources everywhere, whether it was information, equipment, other people. But anyway, I found my way to Siebel and took what at that point was an executive course. They had brewery executives that weren't trying to be brewers but worked in other areas of large brewers from all around the world would come and spend a couple of weeks learning a lot about brewing. Again, not to make them brewers, but to give them in-depth knowledge. And at that point, one of the old guys there kind of took me under his wing and said, well, let's get you in a brewery if this is what you want to do and get you some experience. And I wound up getting a job. Well, it's more complicated than that, but I went to work at the Frankenmuth Brewery in Frankenmuth.
Oh, yeah.
And this was in 1989.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was quite a while ago. And I had a great experience there. I worked for a German master brewer, Fred Scher. That brewery was ahead of its time. The Frankenmuth Brewery was a big microbrewery making traditional German beers, and it was very cool. And there's still a brewery on the location now, but that brewery, it actually burned during construction, and then they did finish the construction, operated for quite a number of years, and a tornado hit it, and it didn't knock it down, but it basically wrecked the building.
This wasn't Frankenmuth Brewing, or this is what it became?
So what's there now is post-tornado.
Okay.
And
wow.
I worked there pre-tornado.
Oh, my gosh.
They were still using all the cellars. It's right along the Cass River in Frankenmuth.
Okay.
And there was a brewery on that site since the 1860s.
Wow.
And so they had, their refrigeration had been in these caves that were in the riverbank. And the Frankenmuth Brewery had retooled those caves, put refrigeration in them, different tanks. But the tanks they had were still big horizontal glass-lined steel tanks. It was quite an experience. The equipment was not what most brewers are using today. But I had a great experience there, learned a ton, wound up going back to Siebel for their diploma course. And then from there, I didn't feel like I was quite ready to start my own brewery, so I wound up going back to northern Michigan, and I got a job with a beer and wine wholesaler that was selling most of the imports and specialty beers that were available at that time. And I wound up working there for Well, at first I thought I was going to be there just seasonally because I was going to brewing school. I went to brewing school. They wanted to have me come continue to work for them if I wasn't going on to something else. So I wound up doing that for another 5 years. At which point I heard about the Big Buck Brewery in Gaylord that was getting open. This is in the mid 90s, and I honestly I thought it was kind of a crazy idea and a crazy concept, but I talked to them, met with them, and decided if they started digging the hole, I was going to go to work for them, and they did, and I did.
What year was that? Remind.
The Big Buck in Gaylord opened in 1995, spring of '95.
And that was that the first microbrewery or what?
No, there were a few others.
Okay.
But again, when I was at Frankenmuth, there were just 3, maybe 4 breweries in the state, and there were 2 in Frankenmuth because there was a Heilemann brewery, which was a really small, big brewery across the river. So there were very few, but there were a few breweries opening in the mid '90s, just a few. So it was on the kind of the front edge of that first wave of openings, I would say.
Yeah, but Big Buck would have been among the most high profile, I feel like, just because it was right on the highway there.
Yeah, it was. And it was
huge.
It was big. Lots of people went there.
Yeah.
And my objective there was to make beer that people wanted to drink, right? Like, it was a couple years before we brewed an IPA. We didn't have an IPA.
So you're doing light lagers, doing
lots of lighter beers, and having a microbrewery license. And at that point, we didn't even have a small winemaker license, so it was just beer.
Yeah.
And you got a bunch of people that aren't used to going to the brewery for beer, and it was a big restaurant that was intended to do a lot of business. So we sold a lot of lighter beers, and I think we exposed a lot of people to the fact that you didn't have to drink stout and brown ale at the brewery. There are approachable beers, fruity beers, different things. And Big Buck was a great experience, and it went on to, although there were some business issues with the plan. Of course, the people that put it together didn't have experience with restaurants, breweries, anything. So it was very busy, not necessarily making money. But a plan was put in place and executed to build more of them and to take the concept beyond just the first one. And we actually went through a public stock offering, which was a very interesting learning experience.
Yeah, no kidding.
And then we wound up opening 3 more Big Bucks, one in Grand Rapids, which was small. It was actually a little buck, sort of. And then there was the one that you can see off the freeway, or could see from in Auburn Hills, just north of Detroit.
That's right.
And then we opened one in Grapevine, Texas, which was a really, really big, fabulous brewery, and it was adjacent to a Bass Pro Shop. It was a really cool project. I think that the one in Texas is still open and operating. The other Grand Rapids, Auburn Hills are not, and then Gaylord is. It's changed owners a couple times, but it's still a great place to go have a beer and have something to eat.
Okay, I got to get up there. I haven't been up there in a while. Do you know what's in the Grand Rapids spot now?
I think it's paved and has car dealership cars on it.
Didn't retain the legacy then. That's too bad.
No. And so from Big Buck, I wound up, as things sort of slowed and they had some business challenges, I wound up, we changed our model, quit distributing beer. And there was really less need for the whole brewing staff we had, and I was wondering what was going to happen, and I wound up learning about and exploring this job with Miller Brewing Company, which was a sales manager job, calling on the distributors in northern Michigan. Well, northern and some lower. I had a really enormous territory, including the UP. And initially, I went and interviewed for the job because I wasn't sure what I was going to wind up doing. I figured I may wind up doing projects for Big Buck if they kept growing, but I just wasn't sure. So I went and explored this, not really thinking I was going to be that interested. But I went through the process and wound up taking the job and had a really great experience working for a large company. I learned a lot. I got exposed to a lot of things, had a lot of fun. It's a big beer company, but it was still beer. When I went to work there, they were owned by Philip Morris, which was, so you've got a big brewery, Miller Brewing Company, but it represented about 4% of, this great big consumer goods company. So
Right.
it was
Right.
there was a huge corporate structure. And then while I was there, South African breweries bought it from Philip Morris. It became SAB Miller. And then it became a very big part of an international beer company. So that was a different experience too. Anyway, got to do a lot of great things, work with beer people. Distributors are beer people. It's interesting. A lot of, most beer distributors got started in a way that was really similar to a small brewery where, one guy, it was usually guys at that time, and his truck and his garage acquired a brand to distribute, and they drove around bar to bar selling that brand into bars and, really building it from the ground up. And today, many of those much larger distributors are still family run. Not all of them. There's tremendous consolidation in that tier, but they're beer people. They have a different focus and a different history, but lots of great people in that industry. And of course, the major brewers, some people disparage them. I really admire what they've done. I think it's amazing to look at the history of those major brewers. They're very serious about quality, even though they make intentionally boring beers. I think you could say that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that they're not good
and they're
examples
consistent
of quality.
I mean, the consistency is something I think any of us in the industry respects a great deal.
Yeah. Yeah. And lots of people who drink local beers started drinking, mass-produced beer. So I admire breweries of all sizes.
I totally agree. So okay, that brings us to when then? So you're at
brings us
Miller.
to 2001.
Okay.
No, it doesn't. It brings us to 2007. Sorry.
Okay.
So then in 2007, I wound up coming back to the Michigan Brewers Guild, which is a nonprofit trade association, formed in 1997. And for many years, it was run by a volunteer board of directors with no staff. So this was the first time that they had grown to the point that they were going to hire a staff person.
Okay.
And I wound up
about 10 years after they founded the thing. Okay.
Yep. And I wound up finding out about that, going through the process, and getting hired to do that job. And I've been in that role now for this is my 18th year.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. So at that point, when you come in to the Brewers Guild, this was 2007. So who are the players in the Michigan industry at that point? I mean, who are you actually representing?
So there were 60 or 70 breweries at the time.
Yeah.
Many of them are gone now. It's interesting to note that, some of those, some of the people that were on the board of directors that I interviewed with, one was Mike Stevens from Founders Brewing. One was Fred Biltman, who was working at Bell's at the time.
Yep. Guest on the show.
Yeah, has a long history in the industry and doing lots of other really creative things. Eric Brigham, who worked at Big Buck Brewery as he got started, but then he worked for Rochester Mills Beer Company and then the Rochester Mills Production Brewery, and he's still making those brands under contract. So, and Eric was the president of the guild for many years. Fred was for many years. Quite a few of those players are, when I look back at brochures and lists and things, are no longer with us. But it's great that the industry has blossomed and grown, and we've got nearly 400 breweries in the state today. Okay, so that was kind of my next question. So there's about 400 breweries. I mean, you don't differentiate by size. They're just no, and some of those are very, very small. There are many wineries that have essentially a homebrew type brewery so that they can offer a couple of beers. There's some that are just plain really small anyway. In fact, most of the breweries in the state, when we look at membership in the guild, which is most of the breweries, not all of them, but about 20% make less than 100 barrels of beer a year, and about 80% make less than 500 barrels of beer a year, or less than 2,000. You get up to 70. my point is that most of the breweries in the state are really small mom and pop neighborhood breweries serving their local community. Even if they
Right.
self-distribute a little bit of beer,
Right.
they're not packaging and distributing beer. And that's a really different business, a packaging, distributing brewery, than a neighborhood kind of tap room brewery. And there are actually relatively few of them. I mean, everybody who's familiar with it can think of, can start rattling off quite a few names. But it's really only 20 or 30 breweries that are significantly distributing their beer in Michigan.
Oh yeah. And it is, as you pointed out, a whole different animal. You're doing the brew pub thing where you've got mostly kegs, maybe you fill some growlers, maybe you do some on hand canning to go, but you're really turning and burning those batches, which is great. From a consumer perspective, I've said this before, and I think around here it's certainly true. A lot of ways, the microbreweries become like the new local pub. People go to their microbrewery instead of that sort of classic bar.
Yeah, it's my belief that when you look at a pub brewery, a neighborhood pub brewery, it's a hospitality establishment.
Right.
It's not that different than a coffee shop. It is, but it's also similar to any restaurant, any place you can go to gather with friends and get something to eat, drink. So I really see them first and foremost as hospitality businesses, which many, if not most, of the people that got into opening a brewery did it because they had passion, wanted to control their own job, creativity, smart, creative, talented people, but they really wanted to make beer. And I think to be successful, you need to grasp and master some level of hospitality, because that's what you're doing is, you're serving beer to guests and, for that retail dollar.
Right. That's what I like about the typical microbrewery, I think, is they love making beer. They've figured out that they have to do the hospitality piece of it because, most people are going out, they want to get a bite to eat, or they want to have at least something with the beer. And a lot of them are pretty innovative in how they solve that problem, which is also what I like. They're not all created equal by any stretch, but by far and large, you end up with some pretty good food, often fairly creative menus that sort of leverage the sort of ancillary passions of the people that are making the beer. And, you've made a lot of beer. I've made a little bit of beer, make more wine, but there's a lot of similarities in that and your typical running a restaurant. I mean, you have to learn how to be clean. You have to learn how to follow directions, how to measure things, how to think through how flavors are going to develop with additional technique and process. And so there's just a lot of overlaps. And I think a lot of people have very successfully leveraged that to make some pretty darn good beer. So,
yeah.
See, he's going for beer, which is always a good sign.
Yeah, I brought a couple of things that I had at home that I don't drink every day. When I was coming, I thought, well, let's see what I have to share.
That's a good segue, because I think the background is awesome. And I wanted to actually kind of dig into some style, because I think somebody who's seen the industry as broadly as you have, I think can speak to styles at sort of a macro level.
Poor Decisions is presented by Fen Valley Consulting Services. Fen Valley Services is a specialized division of Fen Valley Vineyards dedicated to providing expert winery management and consulting services. With over 50 years of industry experience, we help farmers, winemakers, and wine marketers build successful, sustainable businesses. As a trusted winery management company, we offer customized, consultative solutions tailored to the unique needs of each client. Whether you need assistance with winery or tasting room operations, complete winemaking services, e-commerce support, or something else wine-related, our team of experts provides the experience and hands-on support needed to elevate your winery's success. Learn more at www.fenvalley.com.
You mentioned back at the Big Buck days how you really had to thread a needle, because a lot of customers had never experienced a beer with any like significant flavor to it. And so you're kind of working them in that direction maybe. And so I'm just kind of curious. Well, you can start by telling me what you brought, and then maybe we can dig in a little bit on how you've seen sort of styles evolve.
I'm going to have to do a little label reading because I wind up with different beers.
Fair enough. That's fair.
So my favorite beers to drink generally don't include beers that have predominant flavors that come from the yeast and fermentation. So what I'm getting at is like Belgian beers are really heavily influenced by the yeast and the fermentation, and they're dominated by those flavors. Even like a German Hefeweizen is, really got these pronounced, banana, clovey character.
Yep.
Those aren't my favorite beers. I love to drink them and try them. But this beer I just opened is from Barrel and Beam, which is in Marquette. They make exclusively kind of wild fermented and I guess they're very traditional to Belgium maybe, but otherwise non-traditional. And this is a farmhouse ale that they made. I'm guessing it's a one-off. It's
Right.
Wild a tear, and like I haven't had this beer before. I'm not sure exactly why I have it.
Right. I've got a little bit of that in my cellar, though. And I'll put links up to the various producers, whether or not you can get the beer or not. Like you said, it's maybe a crapshoot. But
yeah, they distribute some of their beers.
Okay.
This particular beer, my guess is not. This is not
Right.
one of their regular items.
Yeah.
But it's a fabulous brewery to go check out.
And it's a nice. I like that kind of. Is that I guess what size bottle is that? Because I'm used to wine bottles.
I think it's like a.
It looks like a 375 to me.
It's
so
a
it's
375.
Okay.
So what I did too was I grabbed a couple things that I had that were have the ability to age with some grace in there in wine bottles. I was like, well, I'm going to a winery.
Thanks.
Why don't I bring
There you go.
something
Yeah.
that is beer but it's got some wine-like characters?
Well, that you nailed it with this as far as wine-like characters. And I think this is a yeast-driven product. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
I get that banana kind of clove aromatic thing, but it's nice. It's a very
It is.
nice
It's
beer.
refreshing.
Yeah.
A little bit of tartness. It's light yellow.
Yeah.
Effervescent.
Yeah, no, that's a good beer on a 90-degree afternoon for sure. But it's got some complexity to it. The finish, there's a lot of sort of tanginess on that finish. It's well made, and you said they are generally doing native fermentations.
Yep. They're very particular, which is cool.
Yeah.
There are so many breweries. It's fun to find some of the different focuses that they have. Some breweries really try and make a tremendous variety of styles.
Yeah.
Some are really focused, and
Yeah.
I think even though it wouldn't be my go-to type of beer, I love getting to know those types of breweries and seeing what they do. And it's always exciting to drink a beer or wine or anything after the person that made it sits there and tells you about it and the history of it. It just makes you want to drink it.
Well, that's our whole model here. We're primarily at Fen Valley direct to consumer, and when you get somebody in the tasting room and you can actually tell your story or answer their question, or I take people on tours, and it does make it taste better, and it's nice. It's nice to know where your food comes from. So, and breweries have done. I mean, they were ahead of the curve on this whole thing as far as local. I think in a lot of ways, beer was maybe 20 years ahead of the trends that we're now seeing in the food space, and that's a good thing. So I guess to that point, while we're working through this one, how would you define the arc of styles in Michigan as far as, what you've seen change, what's kind of stuck around the whole time? Is there things that you think as a whole we're better at, known for, or kind of how do you see things?
I really think Michigan is known for a vast range of styles. IPA has grown to be by far the biggest specialty or craft beer category.
Do you still think that's true?
It's segmented too.
Yeah.
There's West Coast IPA,
Yeah.
New England IPA, cold IPA, dry hopped IPA, hazy IPA. There's so many different ones, but Midwest IPA is maltier and less hop forward, if you can say that about an IPA, than a West Coast IPA.
Sure.
But of course, we had Jolly Pumpkin Artisan Ales that was a pioneer in oak fermented beers, and Ron Jeffries, may he rest in peace, was an absolute pioneer in that territory and made some amazing beers that just were different, sour beers, different than what many people knew. Now, one thing I will say is, I think in the early days, local beer just being different was good. Consumers liked it because it was different. It didn't even have to be that good.
Right.
But the consumers gotten smarter and smarter to where they're very sophisticated and have expectations. That's helped raise the bar for all the brewers to get better and better at their craft and make higher quality, technically speaking, beers. And we have a really open and sharing community. We kind of all grew up together, it feels like, and most any brewer will share technical aspects of what they're doing, try and help another brewer, and really hope that other brewers succeed and do well, because it does help raise the whole category. But it's very fraternal, and I think that's helped bring the quality up too. If you're spending time with other brewers and drinking their beer and it's good, it makes you want to continue to focus on your own quality.
Well, the wine industry does the same thing, although we always look to the beer industry and with kind of wonderment at how much Michigan beer has been able to brand themselves on a national stage. I mean, you hear it all. I used to travel a lot more, but when I do travel now, everybody knows about the Michigan beer industry. It's fantastic. I'm just wondering, is there one thing that you can point to as far as quality? You mentioned quality change. Like, what was there any innovation in the space, or has it just been a real slow, methodical, gradual improvement?
Yeah, I think it's been more the latter. I don't think that there was any dramatic change. I think, having great breweries as role models, and I remember the early days of Bell's. Their beer wasn't terribly consistent.
Yeah.
It was kind of homebrewy, but it was fun, and it was exciting. And you look at where they've grown to today, and it's a fabulous brewery. I mean, it seems kind of big, but on the grand scale of things, it's really quite small.
Yeah.
Same with Founders. They make great beers. Yeah, I need to be careful. I don't want to just mention two breweries. Shorts, New Holland, Atwater.
There's a pile of them.
Forgive me if I'm not
our
mentioning
neighbors
you.
at Saugatuck are good too.
Saugatuck,
We've
great
had a lot
brewery
of
that's
them.
been around for quite some time.
Yeah, we lost a great one at Waypost.
Yeah, that was really sad. And we're seeing some challenging times in the industry.
Yeah.
And I get asked pretty regularly now, like, are things saturated, or has the bubble burst? And it makes me think of, going back about 20 years ago, there had been quite a bit of growth, and then things kind of stalled. The growth curve kind of leveled out.
Yep.
Not too many breweries closed, but there was a lot of talk then that the fad was over, and
Yep.
that the shine was off the apple, whatever cliche you want to use. And that's when we had, I think, 80 breweries in the state.
Right.
So we've seen tremendous growth since then.
Yeah.
We've seen some closures. We're seeing a harder environment at retail. Like if you look at big chains like Myers, Spartan, beer space is going to alternative canned cocktails and different things, and that's consumer driven. I think consumers still love beer, and when I look at the overall conditions, I'm really optimistic about the long range future. If you look at the amount of beer that's consumed in Michigan that was brewed here, it's still less than 10%. And I think we'll see the day when that's 20 or 25%, which represents huge opportunity in volume growth. Now, it's also worth pointing out that volume growth will be captured by relatively few breweries that are significantly packaging and distributing. But there's still lots of room for, there could be 100 more pub-type breweries if they run great hospitality operations. Small communities can handle, multiple gathering, dining, drinking operations, and you just have to really be careful about how you're running your business and have a good plan, and I think there's lots of room.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think when I get asked this all the time, as far as right now, you see a lot in the news about decreasing alcohol consumption. There's other alternatives, whether it's marijuana, whether it's, dry January, all these sort of headwinds. And I think that a lot of the decrease is on the margins. And so if you're Anheuser-Busch, that's a big deal because you're really in that marginal space in a lot of ways. You're pumping a lot of stuff through the system, and 1% less of that's a lot of beer. That's, we probably don't, we don't make 1% of their product in a 10-year period probably. But if you're a small craft producer or even a good sized craft producer, you're really functioning in a different plane of existence. You're trying to create value for the customer. And I think that's a really interesting stat. So you said 10% of all beer consumed in Michigan is made in Michigan, so approximately.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a staggeringly low number.
It is.
Yeah, it's staggeringly low. If I look at my fridge, it's like 90% Michigan beer, and the other 10 is like was given to me as a gift. Maybe. I mean, it's interesting. So there's that just speaks to the growth potential without question.
It does, and we're in interesting times right now. Everybody's kind of trying to figure out, how to get the young generation, into the brewery, the winery. It feels like we're kind of missing a half a generation, and I think part of that is still a COVID hangover. I think there's a certain age group that got trained to stay home and not go out and socialize. I think we're going to be seeing the results of that for quite a while. It certainly feels like more people are deciding for whatever lifestyle reason or health reason they have that they don't want to drink alcohol. Certainly support that notion, but I'm not a big supporter of promoting whole months where people just experiment being dry.
Right. Well, the other thing I think about that too is for those of us who are just looking to be a bit healthier, in recognition that there's conflicting science on the consumption and health thing, but let's just say anything you eat is sort of fuel or poison, and wine's a little bit, and beer's a little bit of both. But you focus on the good stuff. I guess that's my thing, is if I'm going to grab a beer, it's one I'm going to like. I'm not necessarily drinking it for the head effect, although I like that too. But let's get the head effect and a really good tasting product at the same time. And I think that's where the craft beverage industry can really grow their lane. If they can really tell that story, you're not going to convince the person who does. You shouldn't even try to convince the person who doesn't want to drink.
Right.
But you're trying to convince that person who wants to drink to understand what they're drinking and enjoy what they're drinking and gain a different perspective on it. I think
and have an experience that's a little more well-rounded than just consuming alcohol. It's interesting to note too. Really sharp beer economist named Lester Jones, who works for the Beer Institute, has continue, he's got some great information. One of the things that I really key in on that he says is if you look back over the last 40 or 50 years at ethanol consumption, so Americans' per capita consumption of alcohol in whatever form it is hasn't changed at all. It's very, very consistent, and we don't have data right now that indeed maybe that's changing right now, but we can't see it yet. We won't be able to see till we can look back. But of course, even though per capita ethanol consumption has been consistent for many years, how people drink it, where they drink, is it wine, is it distilled spirits? Is it occasion based? Is it home based, bar based? That changes all the time and radically. So I'm still waiting to see where things shake out, but it's definitely interesting in different times right now.
Yeah. Well, I did a AMA a few weeks ago on finding wine down in the Caribbean because I was down there, and I had some questions about what I was consuming, and it really had me dig kind of deep into the supply chain logistics stuff. And you mentioned COVID, and I think there's a reason why many reasons why beer might have been hit the hardest by COVID, because it's the hardest thing to move around. By alcohol volume, it's the lowest, so it takes up the most space to move, and you've got temperature concerns, you've got light concerns. So when people moved to consumption at home, naturally getting them beer was going to be harder than them going in the liquor cabinet and pulling out the whiskey that's 10 years old and perfectly drinkable. And wine would have been right behind it, and beer and hard cider would have been the hardest thing to have good stuff at your disposal in the moment.
Yeah, now I think, of course, there are many fascinating dynamics during COVID, and breweries were able to stay open, so they could deliver, or people could come and pick up beer.
Yeah, this was sort of a Michigan-centric idiosyncrasy, I'm sure, but
and I think it got people to think about what it meant to have these local places.
Absolutely.
And they wanted to go support them and spend some money, and see them survive, certainly.
Yeah, and you can't ship beer very well, right? Direct to consumer.
We can't at all legally in Michigan.
Yeah.
There are only a few states.
Yeah.
Beer's way behind wine in that. But and people are interested in purchasing beer and having it shipped. Yeah, but the problem is 5 servings of beer is so much bigger and weighs so much more than a bottle of wine or distilled spirits.
Yep.
But people love going to a brewery and getting that experience and maybe want some of that beer for a special occasion or just to remember it. So there is an opportunity there. I think someday we'll see that follow in the footsteps of wine, but we're not there yet.
Yeah. Well, it took us a long time too, and we're still not there. I mean, you look at the inconsistencies between the states and what you can ship where and when and how, and it's still kind of a nightmare. But there's no doubt that COVID changed the paradigm for the consumer, that they could get it at home. A lot of people just never even considered that an option.
Yeah.
And so now it's like, okay, I can do that. And it's really helpful for the folks, and this is where I think there is an opportunity for beer, for the folks that maybe come to Michigan once a summer for their vacation, and then they want to reconnect with these brands the rest of the year, and they're not distributed nationwide or regionally. That's a great way for that. That's sort of our model. I'm not trying to outcompete the big online wine sellers. I'm looking to continue my connection with the consumer that I've already connected with in my own tasting room. And I could see that being something that breweries could take advantage of in the future, especially for some of the higher ABV stuff, like the stuff that you're bringing that's ageable, that really, it behaves a lot like a wine.
Yep.
And those are the kind of things that you might want to save or have, once or twice a year, more special occasion beers where you can afford, where it makes more sense to ship them because the price point's higher, ABV's higher, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and even special releases, right? Like nobody needs to have a beer shipped to them that they can get regularly at the store. But,
exactly.
But that brewery that only makes a Christmas beer or something,
exactly,
could really drive some consumer demand.
Yeah, definitely. What else did you bring for us today, Scott? I see he's got this is a pro though. He's got a backpack cooler.
Yes.
Which is, I need to get one of those.
That's great. I love that bag.
It's good when you're in your line of work. It's pretty handy for sure. So we're opening. This is from.
So this is another something you're not gonna find.
I'll move the glass over here to make it easier.
This comes from Brewery Becker, which is in Brighton. Matt Becker, the owner and brewer there, is really, his passion is traditional styles and maybe not well-known traditional or ancient styles, and then trying to replicate them. This beer is a raspberry framboise. It's a lambic beer, so it's a Belgian-style beer, fermented for a long period of time with raspberries. I know that everything that Matt does, he makes really traditionally. I've had this before and thought it was just delicious, and I look at, famous ones would be like Lindemann's Creek or Framboise. Fruity, not necessarily super sweet. Great beer for, to have with your eggs Benedict for breakfast.
So you're okay. So what would walk us through I mean, you didn't make this obviously, but with your knowledge of beer making, walk us through how this would be made. So
the beer, beer gets its sugar source typically from malted barley, and in this, I would guess, has a significant portion of malted wheat. And that makes it a little bit lighter base to lay the raspberry on top of, basically. Yeah. And this would be fermented with either a completely wild yeast, or I'm sure this was pitched with a wild strain.
Okay.
And then the beer's fermented, and then it's aged for a long period of time on the fruit.
So are the raspberries, would they be added post fermentation?
No,
during fermentation.
Well, post primary fermentation, but in the aging, that slow, really post fermentation, but for an extended period of time.
Okay.
It's got a really, rich foam.
It does.
Malted wheat.
And and then the raspberries do come through on that aromatic.
Yeah, and the beer's tart. It's got a little sourness.
Yeah, it's definitely sour. I mean, it's got an acidity that, is in the wine category for sure. But really refreshing.
Yeah.
But it's a sourness that has kind of fits with the theme of the beer. I feel like it's not. Sometimes that's my complaint about sours. It's almost like the sours bolted on to the beer.
Yeah, or it's just so intentionally sour that like it's just dominating everything.
Yeah, it doesn't work its way into the overall profile. Where I think this is well balanced in that regard. So it's very interesting. I'm super glad that you brought it. And then they would do the second fermentation. Is that probably in bottle?
No, it would be in a tank.
Okay.
And my guess is 6 months or longer on that fruit. And then packaged in the bottle. This is likely bottle conditioned to get the condition. I'm not sure. We can probably tell when we get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, if there's some sediment in there.
Yeah.
You mean? Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's definitely hazy, I think, in general, which is, I'm sure, on purpose. And then this is, for those who aren't watching, is a 750, kind of a champagne bottle, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
What's the ABV on that? Can you?
Good question. It's not terribly high.
It doesn't feel high. I mean,
no, it's not.
And would that be in the style? Fairly low alcohol?
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
It says 5.5.
What are you seeing in trends on ABV? I mean, obviously there's the whole kind of sessionable IPA space, which, really blew up. And then Founders, I think, created, a monster with All Day in Michigan. But what are you seeing more generally speaking?
Trends towards lower alcohol and higher alcohol.
Okay.
So both poles, because double IPAs and strong beers are still growing in popularity, but so are the lower ABV. And I think that's where the huge volume opportunity is, to me. I think is
in the lower
lower ABV, right? Because we all, I guess I shouldn't say we all, but I really like to sometimes drink 6 or 8 beers that don't have a lot of alcohol, and then I don't want to think about them. I just want to socialize and drink some beers, whether I'm on the boat or whether I'm with friends. And it's also like I'll share a really big secret. If you look at our country, by far the biggest selling style of beer, without any question, is American light, low calorie lager. Number 2 is full calorie
lagers.
So they sell those in multi-pack cans. So you wonder why Shorts Locals Light is finding some popularity in 12 and 24 pack cans. Now you have to hit a price point that is competitive, which is difficult.
That is the hard part.
I think that there's lots of opportunity in more sessionable, more kind of mainstream beers, and I think people like drinking them. They like knowing they're supporting a local business and connecting with the beer. So I think we'll see more of that, but we're not going to see IPA go away. We're not going to see people quit innovating with IPAs, and stronger beers are really popular too.
Yeah, I think I did not know the answer to that question before I asked it by any stretch. So it doesn't surprise me though. So basically what I'm hearing is a more intentional consumer choice, because they're going to both poles for a reason. They're going low alcohol for refreshing, light, sessionable beer that you can, I always tell people, you can have one and you still mow your lawn, kind of a thing. And then they're going to the higher ABV when they want that richer, more, full experience, probably likely with food, in a different scenario, and so they're more intentional about it. And that middle ground is just kind of getting washed out because there wasn't as much purpose built behind that 5, 6, 7% beer. You're not gaining a whole lot that you couldn't get at the lower end, and you're definitely not getting to where those higher ABVs can deliver. Is that an accurate way of sort of describing
I think that's really fair. The other thing that it does for me, and I'm sure there are other people like me, is it kind of opens the middle ground up too, to where you go to a brewery and they just have a nice amber ale or red ale, and it's like, I don't always get that, and it's really enjoyable to find something in the middle too, or just a regular pale ale.
Yeah.
Something that's
especially at the pub, like you say, you're there
exactly.
and you're grabbing a snack, you're grabbing some food, and it's right there. I totally agree. I like rye in that scenario.
Yeah.
You get a little bit more flavor in that mid section of the ABV lineup. So, but this is really nice. I'm glad you brought it. It's one that's I'll be thinking about this one later because it's just sort of different.
Really interesting, and it's a rarity. I got it at the brewery from Matt, and I've had it for more than a year.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Now, so aging, because aging beer.
Yeah. Now let me talk about aging beer.
Great.
I think people do it to a fault more than they do it to a benefit.
I think we could say the same thing about wine, to be honest, Scott.
And I happen to be somebody that even when you get aged beers, I like the ones that beers that age well. I generally like ones that aren't that old. Some people really like them as they develop those. Those kind of oxidized flavors of overripe fruit and things. I tend to like them a little younger than that.
Yep.
But there are some beers that have the ability to age with grace. In general, beer is like a piece of fruit, and it's going to be better fresh, better if it's handled delicately, and it is gradually getting less and less fresh and less good over time. That being said, sour beers with really really low pH and in high ABV, they can age really well. And some beers are intentionally aged. An IPA that has a lot of hops, that hop character diminishes pretty quickly.
Yes,
those aren't great beers to store. But what happens is people get a beer that they can't always get, and they want to save some to share it with their friends. And I'm guilty of it too. It's like, I'm not going to drink that right away, and then it sits in the basement in my rack, and I dig it out, and I was like, I should have drank that one sooner.
I've got that in the beer category at my house right now. I guarantee it. And I'm kind of with you when it comes to my fermented beverages too. I tend to like them a little bit when they're a little bit younger. They seem to be a little more aggressive, more assertive in the kind of original flavors or aromatics. Not that I don't mind the older stuff. It can be fun to bring out and try.
Yeah.
But if I was, Desert Island question, if I had to pick one, I'd go more to the younger side of that glide slope, generally speaking.
Yeah, when I was at Big Buck, we made a strong winter warmer. And from the first year, we put kegs aside, planning to, every year when we brought out the new batch to bring out of the library previous years. And so it was really fun to see how other people reacted to it. So here's one that's 4 years old, 3 years old, 2 years old, relatively fresh. And some people like the older ones. I tend to like them, not that old. It's interesting. It's just a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, that's a nice one. I think you brought one more. So
speaking of higher alcohol, and again, this is a beer that you're not going to find. It was given to me by my friend Edward Stencil. He's on the Michigan Brewers Guild Board of Directors.
Okay.
Helps us at our festivals. He has a brewery in Oak Park, Michigan, which is in the Metro Detroit area. It's called Unexpected Craft Brewing Company. They're really small. They don't really distribute. They're a pub-type brewery. This is an imperial stout, a barrel-aged imperial stout that he made to celebrate their 10th anniversary. And he started originally in Royal Oak as River Rouge Brewing Company.
Okay.
So the 10 years is both companies. He's now, only got this place. It's really cool. It's got actually a patch. It is glued out as part of the label. So I'm going to keep that patch.
Yeah, I was going to say, okay,
and
that's
I'll put it with all the other patches and stickers I have in a box. So
there you
I don't
go.
know what I'm ever going to do anything with.
Right.
But this is barrel aged. It's an imperial stout. So it's going to be higher alcohol, very rich, and then it's barrel aged in, I'm sure he told me, 12 months in port barrels. So there you go. There's a wine connection there.
Yeah,
too.
I don't know that you did that on purpose, but we make a port. So we'll cover that in a different podcast. But okay, so imperial stout aged for, you said, about a year in a port barrel. Wow.
12 months, yep.
12 months. Yeah, it delivers on the stout in the nose for sure. I'm not picking up the port barrel in the stout in the nose. That's probably on purpose. How old would you say this beer is?
Probably not, probably 14 months
Okay.
old or something.
Okay.
It probably wasn't that old when it went in the barrel. Yeah, it's definitely got some kind of barrel funkiness in the nose.
Yeah, I get kind of an espresso, which is very much in the style, which I like.
Yep, some nice sweetness. Mm-hmm. Good mouthfeel, round. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a heck of a beer. I mean, that's a beer. I mean, that's a knife and a fork kind of beer.
Yeah, it is.
But it's good. It's really good. I mean, you could, but again, different beer for different situations. That's the beer I'd want with dinner. It's got that heft to it.
It would be good with dessert too.
Or
that'd be good with a book by the fire in February.
Yes.
And a snifter. Right?
Yeah, this is port, in beer
Yeah.
form for sure. It's interesting that they're using old port barrels. So, like I said, we'll dive into port some other time because it's like a whole thing to itself. But that's a very interesting crossover between two styles of fermented beverages that are quite different. But I like it. Yeah, that's it. And you said this is out of, what's the name of the brewery again?
Unexpected Craft Brewing Company in Oak Park.
Okay, I'm gonna put I always put the stuff in the notes for the podcast. If anybody wants to check out any of the beers we're trying today, whether you can get them or not is a different story. But all these breweries are around, so you can find something that they're up to.
Yeah, and our trade association, the Michigan Brewers Guild, on our website at mibeer.com, we've got a map with all of our brewery members. So if you ever find yourself in an area and want to find the local breweries, I mean, you can do it with Google too. But, we've got a good map.
Are there any breweries not in the guild? Not that we have to name by name, but I mean, it's not like a requirement.
Yeah, there are a few. I mean, they have to pay dues to support what we're doing, so not everybody either can or wants to do that. Mm-hmm. Periodically, we'll go through the list of all the licenses and look at the non-members, and there are a couple that are, just resistant or don't find the value.
Yeah.
This year we had some people not renew because they were just financially really strapped.
Yeah.
But generally, when we look through the list, it's mostly, there's some licenses that aren't even making any beer.
Yeah,
some are really primarily a winery or other business, and
Sure.
the beer's just not a big part of their business. I get that. And then there are relatively few that are just kind of holdouts or contrarians.
Yeah.
And we really want every brewery to join. The mission of our trade association is to promote and protect the industry. We work in Lansing. We support the Brewers Association's efforts in Washington, D.C. Alcohol is heavily regulated. You have to pay attention to what's happening policy-wise, or you're likely to get run over and have bad things happen. So it's really critical that we have member support. And we really appreciate that and value our members and try and give them lots of resources to help their business survive.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and this, the reasons for being part of it makes sense. I mean, as we talked about already, it's the beer industry in Michigan has done an awesome job of branding the entire thing, and that's the key, because with only 10% of beer we're drinking made in Michigan, clearly there's room for growth, and we're going to do it through cross promotion, because a lot of these places, like you said, if only a handful are actually distributing, which is, we all know why that can be challenging. That, again, that's a whole other podcast topic perhaps, but that means the majority of the time we're trying to get the person to go to that brew pub, to go to that microbrewery and pick up stuff there, go there, experience it.
Absolutely. That's our focus, is to try and find ways to drive people to the local brewery, drive business right there. And as I look behind you, I'm looking at the Michigan Craft Beverage Council. Michigan Craft.
A new brand just launched this week.
Yeah, and I think that I'm really excited about that. I think an important part of the future of all of our alcohol beverage industries here in Michigan is really to establish Michigan as a region with great beer, great wine, great cider, mead, distilled spirits. Thinking of something like the Champagne region of France, or or even Wisconsin cheese, right? To just think that to create this image of these products, knowing that there are so many great options in the state of Michigan.
Yep.
I think that that's really important for all of us, and I'm excited about what the Craft Beverage Council is doing.
Yeah, I mean, last point on that, I 100% agree. We are tailor-made for this. You know, we have this great manufacturing base in Michigan. So you've got in our DNA making stuff, whether it's cars, furniture, whatever, and then growing stuff. You know, we have we're a farm. So you put those two together. That is what craft beverages are, and so we're built for it. We're almost too good at all the things. You know, so we haven't gotten focused on one thing like cheese or one thing like champagne. You know, we do ciders, we do beers, we do spirits, we do wine, and so that's good, but it also, I think it does make it more challenging because we're really covering a lot more waterfront.
Yeah, and we individually kind of get in our segment of the industry, but when we look at consumers who drive all this with their dollars, most consumers like going to a winery and a brewery and a distillery, and they are not committed to just one beverage. Sure, some are, but mostly they look at it as a broader category anyway. So I think it's great when we can find ways to promote it that way.
Yes, that's a great way to look at it. Well, I've got one more quick segment for you, Scott, which is the This Won't Pour segment. I always like to say the easiest way to think about it is something that you could get through the TSA checkpoint when you're getting on an airplane. So the
This Won't Pour segment is sponsored by Carrier Signal. Carrier Signal is an IT services provider specializing in small and medium businesses with unique needs. They handle everything from technology and security assessments, cloud migration, point-of-sale integration, and cloud-based phone systems. Learn more at www.carriersignal.com.
And I can go first, give you a chance here. But if there's something that's not related to craft beverages that's on your mind or that's interesting or that you want to enlighten our listeners with, I've got a thing that I found the other day for my son, and I don't know where I found it, probably deep in Amazon, but he's into golf, and we live on a farm, so I can't always get to the golf course, and I want him to keep hitting balls. I played a lot of golf as a kid. I'm not that good at it. My brother's much better than I am, but I get around the course. There's this product called the Birdie Ball, which is like, these wiffle balls you buy, which honestly, they kind of suck. Like you hit them and they go like 6 feet, and if there's a cross breeze, they go 6 feet in the other direction. It doesn't really teach you how you're hitting the ball at all. This Birdie Ball is this thing that you hit it, and it feels like you're hitting an actual golf ball, but the thing goes like 10% of the distance, but it shows like it showcases my mean slice. Let's put it that way. So it's a better training device. So I'll put a link in the podcast. It's nothing crazy deep, but it was just like for my son, like now he can go out and hit balls around the farm, and he's actually like learning how his shots are working, and he's taking out way fewer windows as a result. So that's my This Won't Pour for this week.
Well, that makes me think of one of my biggest passions, which is my daughter, and she golfs some. I don't golf at all. I have too many boats I don't use to mess around learning to golf. But my daughter Lily likes to golf, and she's not very good. I'm sure that she wouldn't feel too bad about me saying that, but I got her a net that she could hit into so that she can practice.
Yep.
And she does use that. But my daughter just graduated from Michigan State University. She just
a Spartan. Go green.
Yeah,
I like
go
it.
white. She's 2 weeks into her first post-college job, and it's really exciting to see her move into that, and she still loves her dad and misses being at home, and that's a great thing too.
Yeah, that is a good thing. Yeah, golf in Michigan's hard because we don't get year-round play.
Yeah.
I'm always impressed with like Jack Nicklaus grew up in Ohio and became an elite golfer, hitting balls in his basement into a net like you got your daughter, where a lot of the other players in that era were all down in Florida, other places where you could play year-round. It's a huge disadvantage, and so luckily technology is starting to level the playing field a little bit, but that's a good one. So, well, Scott, I really appreciate you coming on today. I know you were in the neighborhood already, but you're all over the place all the time. So it's hard to track you down, and I'm grateful that you spent some time with us. I'll put all the links to the stuff we talked about today in the podcast, but for now, that's about it. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us today, and for Scott, for you joining me.
Thanks, Brian. I really appreciate being invited. It's very gracious of you to have me on the show.
All right. Well, cheers.
Cheers.